Hey, everybody, welcome again to Step to Stories. We are in episode 24, and I am so excited. Today, we're going to be talking to Alicia Bush, who leads Treasured Vessels, and it is an organization that helps people that have been in human trafficking situations. And there's so much about what they do. I will tell you that one of my really good girlfriends and I went to see the movie Sound of Freedom on Friday, and I know most of you have seen it and have seen the film. And I knew that there were problems, but I had no idea to the extent of the problem. And the movie really got me. I cried from the beginning to the very end, and walked out of it with my girlfriend and said, "Well, what can we do? How can we help?" And it was then that I started researching. She said, "Well, you should call my buddy Alicia, because she has this amazing organization here locally that helps." And so I connected with her, and she's here, and I'm so grateful that she's here. And she's going to be talking to us about something very serious. Um, and tell us about why she started the organization, what they are doing to help, what is the problem, and what a lot of us see on media and what we think it is and what it really is, and what led her to start it, and what we can do to help. So, Alicia, thank you so much, first of all, for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, for having me.
Yes, and I want to ask you first. We talked about this a little bit offline. The movie Sound of Freedom, I watched it. It left me pretty emotional, as it does most people. And as you had stated before, the good part about that film is that it brought awareness.
Yeah.
Why don't you let's start from the beginning. I want to hear, obviously something in your life happened, whether you knew someone, or something happened to you, or something happened to one of your friends, or you were just convicted to help and start an organization. I know starting an organization like this is hard, and it is rewarding in probably many ways, probably not monetary ways. And you know why are you so passionate about this? What is the problem? What are the problems are we really facing? How can we help? How can we protect our children? So you know so much more than I do about this. I don't even know all the questions to ask, so I'm going to let you get started. The rest of you guys, grab your watches. Let's get stepping and listen to the beautiful Alicia Bush.
Well, you ask about 30 questions in about a 60-second time period. But to the point of it, the issue is so complex. And, believe it or not, when we started Treasured Vessels, I didn't know anyone that had been trafficked. I wasn't trafficked myself. I wasn't sexually abused. It was simply a call on my life. And what I mean by that, I was in medical device sales for 14 years in a career that I loved. I was very successful in the eyes of man. I made good money. I had stability. I supported my family and my husband while he was building his custom home business, and really kind of checking all the boxes for what success looks like. But I just had this ache of wanting to know why I was created. So I liken it to, when we grow up, most of the times, those that are in our family or teachers or will ask, what do you want to be when you grow up, little Johnny? And, you say a firefighter or, but really the question at the end of the day, in my opinion, should be for those of us that are believers in Jesus, that the question should be, what was I created for? Why am I here on earth? And I just began to ask that question, and I felt this even more burning need to, as I began to ask that question, I couldn't be involved in my 60, 80-hour a week job, be a mother of 3, and I needed to resign. So I resigned from my career and went home, and I told my husband in that order, which I would not recommend. We've been married 20 years now, but that was a
You basically just one day said, "God, I'm willing to do what you want me to do." This came into your heart, and you gave your notice. Because I was also in sales, very successful, and you didn't really have a backup plan. You just said,
here we go. And it was a here we go. I don't know what it looks like. Maybe God is going to call me back to where I was. Maybe I am to be dedicated and stay home with my children and focus on that specifically. But it was just more of a, God, I want what you have for me, and I want to know what it is. And it was about 11-month journey of just asking that question and positioning my heart with, there's a yes in my heart, which is a really exciting place to be, but also a very scary place to be, to not know if God is going to call you around the world, what assignment he has. So on a Friday night, I went to my husband in November. So remind you, I was resigned January 1st, about 11 months of surrender. I went to my husband on a Friday night and I said, you know what, I have all these ideas. And nothing really had to do with trafficking at all. I should say nothing had to do with trafficking at all. Completely zero. We're international missionaries, but nothing that had to do with child abuse or anything in this particular space. But I gave him all these ideas and he looked at me and he said, no, that's not it. I'm like, what do you mean that's not it? And, we're brainstorming here. And he looked at me and he said, Alicia, what are you going to do with your hands? And he held up his hands like this. And he said, what are you going to do with your hands? Are you going to dig a well or build a school? What are you going to do with your hands? And I just paused and thought, what an odd question, right? I don't know if he's a custom home builder. So I'm like, I don't know if it's the builder in him or the man in him that uses his hands. But I just said, okay, Lord, what am I going to do with my hands? And the next morning I sat straight up out of bed and God said to me, you will build an aftercare facility for girls rescued from sex trafficking.
So, all right, let's stop right here. So let me ask you, for the person on watching, because I am a believer in Jesus Christ and I'm his child. Do I sway off sometimes? Yes, I do. But did you audibly hear him say this, or did you feel it, or can you tell us?
It was a knowing. To sit straight up out of bed and feel that impression and hear, not audibly, but in my spirit. But I'd been going for 11 months, right? And just really in a posture of yes. And God can speak in our busyness and our chaos, but for me, it was truly be still. And that's what I had been doing. And really, really leaning in. And so I was kind of this open vessel, if you will, to be able to hear clearer than I've ever heard in my life. I know my husband and I drove onto some property here locally, and I felt an impression and heard in my spirit, Kingdom Estates. My husband's like, what? I said, this property is a big blank pasture, will be Kingdom Estates. And this will be a property that we develop as for your company, Custom Homes in Texas. And he said, okay, the name sounds prestigious. And I said, I don't know. So of course that property, 21 acres, went under contract 3 times since then, and not with us. And we now own that property. We've developed that property, and all of those homes have sold. So there's just something about that knowing in my spirit. That day, you will build an aftercare facility for girls rescued from trafficking locally, not overseas, but right here. And I looked at my husband and I said, I repeated that. We will build an aftercare facility for girls rescued from trafficking.
You know what? I love that, because I have a huge respect for people that go overseas and do missions around the world. But the thought always comes back to me like, we got problems right here. Here. And I've always thought that, like, I think it's great that people go all over the world, and I know we're called to do that. But we got problems right down the street. So I love that you did that.
Yeah, and that was when I repeated it to my husband, and I said and told him what we would do, and he looked at me with that, yeah, and just in so much agreement and peace and resolve that, okay. And so then you go, okay, I don't even know what human trafficking is. What does that mean to be trafficked? Do we have restorative care. What does it look like when someone is recovered? Just like on the movie of Sound of Freedom, what did it look like for the little girl? What does recovery look like for her? Say if going home wasn't a safe option. So that's began the journey of not only asking those questions, but finding out the answers. What local organizations are doing good work in this space? What are their challenges? What's law enforcement's piece in this? Where do they struggle when they have somebody that they've recovered or identified? CPS, adult victims. Does it impact boys? And that was about a 4-year journey of learning about the population, all at the same time, learning how to start a nonprofit. I wasn't in the nonprofit space. I'd never been to a gala. I didn't know how to fundraise. I didn't know any of those things. And so putting together just the business aspects of having a board, putting together a 501c3, policies, guidelines, advisory council, a website.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, oh, well, we have, I know about this. I Google it now. I see it everywhere. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell people what we're doing. And they are going to get behind this and they're going to be excited to be a part of something that's local, that's a local solution for a local problem. And we're going to fundraise and we're going to get these homes built. And that wasn't what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Start talking to people and they say, oh, I support this organization. I'm like, but they're overseas, or I've never heard of this, or this doesn't happen here. And it, not that I got resistance. It was just more of a, I don't understand. What are you talking about? Or right. Or they were struck with fear. What? You mean this could happen to my kid? Or when we talk about trafficking, we really have to talk about pornography and we have to talk about sexual abuse. And that can hit home really quick. With the CDC says 1 in 3 American girls will report being sexually abused by the age of 18. So 1 in 3. So that's a lot of young ladies. That's a lot of mamas and aunts and grandmas that I'm talking to, having lunch with, speaking at PTA, that are in the room saying, yeah, I get it.
All right, I have a question for you. I was speaking with a person about sexual abuse the other day. I've always been under the impression that sexual abuse is when an adult sexually violates a child. But I was told it can also be child to child.
Absolutely.
Even the same age, as young as 4 or 5. Yep. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
So if you're a child, so it's not, the whole playing doctor thing is not an innocent thing. That is actually abuse.
I mean, I think that if it would come from someone that was sexually abused and knew how to play doctor for the purposes of what they felt was normal to another child that had not been sexually abused, wasn't exposed to anything like that, yeah, the other parents could say, your child abused my child. But the child only knew how to abuse because, one, they learned it in school. We have to worry about what's going on in our education system, right? They learned it on YouTube, or they learned it from someone in the home or a coach. Or so yes, it's a very, that's it. And that with a child, especially when it comes to trafficking, the law states that anybody under the age of 18, we don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. But when it happens with anybody over the age of 18, there's a whole lot of things that we got to prove to get a case to stick.
Got it.
But we also know that pornography, the United States is the largest distributor of child pornography in the world. So when we talk so much about victims and survivors and traffickers. But where there is a supply, there is a demand. And the porn industry fuels the demand for trafficking. We know that there's a direct correlation. And that's a hard conversation for you to have with your spouse that has had a porn addiction, but he or she leaves you out of it, and it's, you just ignore it, and boys will be boys or girls will be girls, whatever it is, that excuse that we have made up in our head to not really hit this thing head on and bring it into the light and bring healing in this space and marriages and with individuals in our country. This is why we are where we are. We have to start communicating about, kind of like what we're talking about, child abuse. We talk about alcoholism, but when it comes to pedophilia, when it comes to pornography and addiction, for some reason, it's still, well, not for some reason. I mean, it's a hard topic. I don't want to make light of it, but we have to start helping individuals because, again, like I mentioned, it is fueling the human trafficking industry. It is fueling the demand when it comes to sex trafficking. Human trafficking has two.
So when you're talking about pornography, even like a husband and wife that are watching it or whatever, you're saying all of that is still linked. They fuel, they support the human trafficking. So it is all dark.
It's all dark. It's all gonna, and say maybe it starts out as a curiosity, right? But then I've never met a couple that's like, oh, we have this healthy relationship with each other and with pornography, and he's never gone further or she's never gone further, or we've never had affairs. Or I would imagine that that's a really, really rare instance.
Right.
It's kind of like how we talk about marijuana.
Right.
Someone that's on heroin, is an IV drug user. They say, well, I started here and then it wasn't enough, so it ended up here. And again, I'm not saying this for everybody, but we have to recognize that human trafficking just doesn't, you just don't all of a sudden traffic someone. You don't all of a sudden just go and purchase and pay for sex out of the blue. It had to have started. And a lot of times the vulnerabilities start with the child abuse, with the abuse at a young age, and then it can progress. There's a lot of science behind this. But when we talk about human trafficking, I'll go back a little bit, that includes labor, organ trafficking, and sex trafficking. So obviously we're specifically talking about sex trafficking. I know that, 100% of the girls that have come into our program experienced some sort of sexual abuse as a child, somewhere along the way, whether they were 2, whether they were 9, or whether they were 15. It always started there. Right now, Texas ranks number 2 when it comes to sex trafficking.
Wow.
And with the border being open, and we know that those numbers were kind of probably all over the place and probably not that accurate right now. We don't really know our numbers with the border being open, but with as many calls as Texas receives, we rank number 2, and we kind of go back and forth between us and California.
Can you just define what is sex trafficking?
I don't have it memorized, but anybody can look it up, and it is on a government website, but it requires force, fraud, or coercion. So it can look very different, and it can be very gray. When people in the public say, we can go out here on the street and we can see somebody in the street corner and she's a prostitute and she is out there willingly. I've never met an individual that says, I am here willingly. I said, okay, well, hold on. Who do you give your money to? Well, I give it to my boyfriend. Okay, well, what does your boyfriend do when you don't bring home your $2,000 quota a night? Well, there's consequences. Really? What do those consequences look like? Well, I mean, maybe he hits me, but I deserved it because I didn't make my quota. Maybe I go without food. Maybe he threatens my family, my sister, or he ups my quota the next day. There's that, you see that force, fraud, or coercion for something of value. I'm gonna beat you to death. I'm going to starve you to death. I am going to punish you for not bringing home my money. And it there's an exploitation part of it. Like, imagine single mom loses her job during COVID, and rent is coming up, and the landlord has really taken is really taken by her 13-year-old daughter. 13-year-old daughter's already sexually active, and he says, you know what, your rent's due, and if you don't pay it, then get out. Mom says, you want to spend the time, you want to spend some time with my 13-year-old? Or 13-year-old says, Mommy, it's okay. I do this all the time with other boys. I don't want to be homeless again. We've already done that. We've already been homeless. We already lived in a shelter. I don't want to do that again. Mom, let me help.
This happens a lot.
Yep. When we talk about familial trafficking, I mean, yes, we can talk about parents that are or family members that are addicted to drugs that use their children to get their drugs. But I really want to just keep this very really relatable to all the listeners, right? That these young boys and young girls are going to school with our kids. They're in our churches. They're sitting next to us in a doctor's office. They are interacting with us each and every day. They're on the internet. The traffickers are on the internet. They're business people. So they recruit just like anybody that was in sales. They know what they're looking for. They can find the vulnerabilities in the young person. Young people get online and they post that they had a rough day. That trafficker, that recruiter, the recruiter may be even their same age. And the recruiter's only recruiting to save their own butt, to save their own journey by recruiting. Sometimes they even recruit unwillingly or unknowingly. Like trafficker will say, "Hey, why don't I'll pay you $50, quarterback. I'll pay you $50 to bring 2 girls to my party next weekend." And the kid's like, "Really? $100? Okay." And he does. And he has no idea that he's just feeding this trafficker and that these girls will be raped violently 10 to 15 times a day. They'll be recorded, or they're going to start building a relationship with this trafficker and sending photos, and which he'll eventually use and threaten to exploit them, where they feel that they have no option than to continue recording, continue sending photos, which he's selling, but then the shame and the guilt comes in it so great that they end up running away. They can't do it anymore. And they run away, and he promises to buy them this, promises to give them a better life than they have at home. And maybe home life isn't great. And then she finds herself, or he finds herself, in a situation they feel like they can't get out of because they've been in it too long. They're brainwashed. They feel so the deep shame. Maybe they're addicted to drugs now because that's how the trafficker keeps them on the hook. The mental health is so tarnished to a place that where they can't even now. The trauma bonds are so linked. They don't even know how to get out. They don't even know how to ask for help because they don't even feel like a victim. He makes them, or she makes them, feel like this is your fault. You chose this.
Wow.
You sent me those pictures. You did such and such. And they believe it. They're master manipulators.
Wow. So, do these things happen everywhere? Affluent areas, poorer areas? Like, does it matter where you live?
Nope. Doesn't matter at all. I mean, it is happening. I mean, we know that child abuse, if you look, where does child abuse happen? Anywhere and everywhere. Okay, well, then trafficking is happening as well. Trafficking can look as extreme as, chaining a girl to a bed and pumping her full of drugs and having men just come in and out of that room over and over and over. But that is so rare. It's more like, let's put you on a plane, send you to, actually, let's put an ad on the internet with your photo that you sent me, right? Like, you don't know that I've put your photo now on an ad. I found some men that will pay for you at their bachelor party or the Super Bowl or somewhere where large groups of men gather. Buyers are typically men, unfortunately, for all the men listening. And now the photo's been sent. He knows how much money he can get. And he says, why don't you get on that plane and you go and you come back and bring me my money? And she says, okay.
So these are American men buying these young girls, like 10-year-old girls or 12-year-old?
2-year-old?
You know, I guess I thought pedophilia, when I thought of a pedophile, I thought of the one-off mentally ill, sleazy, greasy guy. Very rare, very, very. I did not know that this was so rampant and so big.
Well, Google, this is a new thing. They're not pedophiles anymore, apparently. They don't like that name because that is a name that could be very hurtful.
Oh.
So now they're saying minor attracted people or minor attracted persons. They are trying to now get this as a sexual orientation, that this is something that's okay in the LGBTQIA community, that this is, we can't help it that we're attracted to children. So it's not rare.
Is that why I couldn't understand for the life of me why that movie was politicized? Is it because of the border situation? Is that
because everybody in all the high places and all the low places are all participating? The darkness that surrounds this particular space is so incredibly, I hate to use the word fascinating, but I think that's why there's been so much censoring. There's been, we try to make it political and then other people won't see it, or we try to make it a religious and people won't see it. Right. Whatever reason it is, we can keep it in the darkness, put our head in the sand and say, it's not happening here. It only happens in developing countries. Is such a place of ignorance. And that's exactly what the trafficker wants you to do. I have books in my office that are by traffickers, by pimps, teaching other pimps how to be pimps. We sing about it on our rap songs. You and I grew up with songs that we had no idea they were talking about pimps and hoes. And it was all about trafficking. It always has been. We just never saw it as that. We never defined it like that. Just like the girls out on the streets of Harry Hines here in Dallas, they're just the underbelly of society. They're just out there because they want to be. But now we're finding out there is somebody controlling those decisions. That's come from a place of abuse. These girls and men that are out there being trafficked are physically and they're brutally abused every single week to the point of death. And we just look at them, we just look the other way. And because we always have until now.